of the Portland Children's Levy Allocation Committee. Just like everybody else gets busy in the fall, we're no different. Our agendas are getting busier as we move towards making investment decisions for the newly reauthorized Children's Levy. We'll be making those decisions over the next several months, and today we're going to have a busy agenda that's going to help frame us getting to making those decisions in 2014. And I want to start out by introducing my colleagues on the allocation committee. To my right is Mitch Horniker, who is the representative for the Portland Business Alliance. And Julie Young is not able to join us today. On my left is Serena Stoudemire Wesley, who represents the citizens of Multnomah County. And next to me, for her very first meeting as an allocation committee member, is Multnomah County Chair Marisa Madrigal. So welcome, Marisa. And Marisa is filling the seat that was held by Deborah Kafori. Many of you know Deborah Kafori has resigned her seat at the County Commission in order to run for County Chair. So we're happy to have, we want to thank Deborah, first of all, for all of her work. And we're happy to have Marisa here. And just wanted to give you an opportunity if you wanted to say a word or two. The mic is yours.
Sure. Well, you know, it's actually an honor to be representing the county and to have a chance to be a part of this important work. As the mother of two children, there's nothing more important that we could be spending our time on than making sure that the children of our community are successful and healthy and thriving. So I'm really excited to be here and hope that I can contribute.
Well, we're happy to have you here. Next, I want to introduce the staff of the Portland Children's Levy, the director, Lisa Pellegrino, sitting at the desk there. And she's also in charge of after-school investments. And then there's the assistant director, Meg McElroy, who oversees the early childhood and mentoring investments. Lisa Hansel in the back there, who supervises our foster care and child abuse prevention and intervention investments. Communications Director Mary Gabe Broderick, and to my left, fiscal specialist John Kelly. So just as I always do, a quick background on the Portland Children's Levy. We were created by Portland voters in 2002, overwhelmingly renewed in 2008, and in spring of this year, May of 2013, again, we received overwhelming approval, about 75% of the voters. The levy annually provides about $10 million to support organizations reaching some 10,000 children and their families through programs in early childhood, after school and mentoring, child abuse prevention and intervention, and helping children in foster care to succeed. And with the voter approval of the reauthorized Children's Levy, we also have a new funding round next spring. We will begin funding programs to alleviate childhood hunger. The levy operates with a 5% administrative rate and is annually audited by an outside independent firm. So the first item before us today is to approve the minutes from our September 23rd meeting.
So moved.
Okay, moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Great, minutes are approved. As we always have a time in the beginning of our meeting for people who wish to talk to us about items that are not on the agenda later on in the meeting. We do have items later on in the meeting that I think many of you will want to speak to us on, and you'll have that chance to just talk about that. But if there's anybody here who wishes to speak to us now on any general children's levy issues, now is your time to do so. Is there anybody that wishes to come up? Okay, I don't see anybody, so we'll, as I said, we'll have time later on our agenda to comment on the foster care goal before we take a vote on that item, as well as two other items that we won't be voting on today, but we will be interested in what you have to say. We will be discussing the allocation of funding between program areas, and we'll be discussing the strategic direction for those program areas. So we'll move on to our first item, our first and only voting item today, and that is our foster care goal. And Lisa Hansel is going to walk us through. As you may recall, in the last meeting we'd approved levy overall goals as well as specific program goals in each of the funding areas except for foster care. where staff was asked to review the goal after some public input was brought up at that meeting. And staff will now give us their discussion, or discuss their recommendations for us.
Okay. As Commissioner Saltzman said, at the last meeting, Mike Balter, the Executive Director from Boys and Girls Aid, raised a concern about the goal as stated, which was help children in foster care succeed. And his concern really was around the fact that, as it was stated, could imply that our goal was to help children be successful in their foster care placement. He also, at that time, raised a concern and a suggestion that the goal instead focus on helping children exit foster care as quickly as possible to permanent and safe living situations. Given the concern that was raised at the last meeting, the allocation committee asked that staff have further conversations and come back to the October meeting with alternative language. Staff did communicate with Mr. Balter, and he suggested during that conversation an additional proposed goal, and that is support the well-being of children in foster care and prepare children to successfully transition out of foster care. Staff agrees absolutely that it's important for children in foster care to exit into safe, stable, permanent placements and to help prepare youth to transition out of foster care, as is reflected in the strategies that you'll hear later today. However, staff does not believe that preparing children to transition out of foster care should be incorporated into the goal language. Today, we have 3 goals for your consideration. The first, is it on the screen? Yeah, there it is. They're on the screen for those at home and in the audience. The first is to help children in foster care succeed, which is the same goal language that was presented in September. The second is the language that was proposed by community input, which is support the well-being of children in foster care and prepare children to successfully transition out of foster care. And the third is support the well-being and development of children and youth in foster care, which is alternative language that staff created since the last meeting. So at this time, staff recommendation is to continue to recommend the broad goal of help children in foster care succeed. This mirrors the language that's in the ballot language. Staff also supports the third goal listed there, as it's also broader in nature. Staff sees preparing children to successfully exit foster care as part of helping them succeed and contends that it does not need to be stated as part of the goal. So at this point, does the committee have questions for staff or?
So your recommendation is still that we stick with the broader help children in foster care succeed, but then the alternative goal for consideration you're also comfortable with, or?
We're also comfortable with that goal as well because it's broad in nature.
Okay.
And as I said, reflected in the strategies is, it gives further input as to what the intent of the goal is.
Okay. So in our strategies, it's helping kids successfully transition out of foster care was certainly
Right,
one of our strategies, right?
One of the proposed strategies.
One of the proposed
what ultimately
strategies,
gets
right.
approved is to be seen, but it's a proposed strategy at this time.
Okay. Okay, do you have any questions of Lisa?
I don't.
Okay, why don't we see if does anybody wish to speak to us on this proposed goal for foster care? Okay, I see we have one taker. Come on up and just give us your name for the record and organization, if you're representing an organization, and you have 2 minutes.
Okay. Chair Saltzman, members of the committee, my name is Mark McKechnie. I'm the Executive Director of Youth Rights and Justice. We are an organization that provides free legal services primarily to children and youth in the juvenile court system and the foster care system. We are a current grantee for our Schoolworks program, which provides educational advocacy for children in foster care. And I don't know if this is the best time to make these comments, but you can put a bookmark in it if it's not and consider this later, because I think it goes to the goal as well as the funding allocation and the RFP development. In looking, I think the goal is fine because it is very broad and flexible. I actually One of the things that I've advocated for over the last few years is to make the definition of foster care more expansive to include children who have recently left foster care. We actually find that some clients are referred to our program either immediately after or in the months after they've left foster care, because that is a critical time when their school stability is in question. They may need to change schools if they move back home with a parent and in another district. And it has been a frustration that those children are excluded from consideration if they have left foster care by the time that they've been referred to our program. And we'd like to see the definition expanded to include perhaps 12 months following exit from foster care. I guess my other comment has to do with the community findings and priorities for this population. And I found that two that are most important to us seem to be left out of the list. One of those is the mobility of the foster care population as a significant risk factor for mental health issues and school failure. And the other one that I think places a lot of our clients at very high risk is the rate of disabilities, which are 3 to 5 times higher than the general population. And I just want to make sure that that is captured as a key risk factor and area of focus for programs that serve foster children.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Right on time. Thanks, Mark. Okay, well, I appreciate your testimony. Discussion amongst the committee about desire for the language of the goal for our foster care goal.
I think keeping it broad and having that as a strategy, I can see it have it as a strategy, but I like the way that how broad that it is now that way, because there's no limitations to it. So having it part of the strategy and maybe going there, that could be a possibility. But right now, I like keeping it. I prefer to keep it pretty broad because it makes it open and things can be added in and out.
I'm in favor of the broad language.
Okay. Well, I'll entertain a motion to make that the foster care goal.
Are we considering the alternative or the original goal for consideration?
I think
Whatever you,
I think you
whichever
were,
works for you
well,
is
Serena,
best.
were you referring to the original goal, helping children in foster care succeed? Or the,
I was referring to the alternative.
oh, the alternative, okay. Is that what you had in mind?
Sure.
Okay.
I think they're both the same.
Okay.
They work.
Are you,
I do like the alternative language because I think, well, succeed is a good word. Development indicates movement that we want to not just to succeed in place, but to move forward in time and develop and grow. So and it is broad.
okay. So your motion is to
My
approve
motion
then?
is to approve the
Okay.
alternative.
Second.
Okay, second, it's been moved and seconded. All in favor of the alternative goal for consideration, say aye. Aye. Okay, great. So the alternative goal is support the well-being and development of children in foster care.
Thank you.
Thank you. So our next item is something that is very important, and that's since our last meeting, our city economist has provided updated revenue figures for the current fiscal year that we're in. So this isn't for the new levy that takes effect next year, but for the last year of the current levy, which is what we're in. And I understand it contains a bit brighter prediction for revenues, and with that, tee up, I'm going to give it to John Kelly to provide us the information.
Thanks, Commissioner Saltzman. Good afternoon. So as Commissioner Saltzman said, Josh Harwood, the city economist, has given us revised revenue projections for the current year, and the taxes just came out. Most folks in the city have gotten their tax bills, and it's a different number than last year. And he tries to predict based on compression and property values, and he got it wrong, but he got it wrong in a good way. It's 9% higher than was originally projected a year ago, well, back in January. And so the number that we're looking at is 9.16 million rather than 8.4 million in current year revenue. So what the staff did, we talked with Josh and we said, okay, if it's going to be 9% higher this year, what would our funds for granting look like if we project that out for the next 3 years? So basically just bumped his projections up 9% each year. And that comes out to, we told you a little while ago that we would have about $9.65 million per year for the first 3 years of the new levy to grant out. If we bump those numbers up 9%, it's $10.52 million. So that is just a back of the envelope. It's not Josh's new number, but we just want to put that out there as it seems reasonable to think that we're going to have more like 10.5 million rather than 9.6 million per year on average. We're going to fine tune all of this in January when city economist gives us brand new projections. He'll know in January, he'll know what the property values are that are the basis for the new assessments and the new caps. So without getting into too much detail, we'll have better numbers, more accurate numbers for the new levy. But the news right now is good, and Josh is also confident that we'll, what we all know about what the market's been doing, things are looking good. So just to give a little context for those figures, the 10.5, we're currently granting about 8.1. Well, we're currently granting 8.1 this year in our competitive grants. So it's looking like there will be more than current monies available.
Did you say 10.5 or 10.25 million?
10.52 is the number.
Oh, 10.5.
Yeah, so
I transposed.
again, that's very preliminary. In January, we'll know much better. But again, a January number to October, there's a certain degree of certainty, but that's what we rely on for our. So that's the numbers that will go into the request for investment. Is the numbers that Josh gives us in January.
And then I think one question I asked you a few days ago when we had a staff check-in. So the higher money we're realizing this year is basically going to be put into the pot for money to be allocated by this committee starting next year.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Any questions?
Questions?
Is this the result of less compression? Is compression the factor here in the
Exactly.
Happy
Yeah.
News?
Yeah. So calculating compression is complicated.
Yeah.
And we're happy he got it wrong the way he did, and hopefully that informs. Hopefully it informs greater accuracy going forward.
Any other questions? Okay, well,
Great,
thanks.
thanks.
Thanks for the encouraging news, John. Our next item, staff will present a summary of the public input findings, and this is culled from months of extensive outreach, community meetings, and survey data collection. And there are copies of the report's executive summary available for the audience over to my right, over here. And we'll be discussing these findings first, and then delving into the two other issues. One is the outlining the allocation of funding between program areas, and the other deals with strategic discussion for those program areas. And again, there are handouts for both of those discussion items over on the side of the chambers here. So turn it over to Meg McElroy for the survey of the data findings.
Great, thanks. So just before we get started, a couple of things I want to help orient everyone who's viewing at home, those of you sitting there making decisions about these things later down the road, and those of here in the audience. The results of the community input process came from you all approving a plan that guided that process at the January 4th meeting of this body, June 4th meeting this summer. It approved going forward with 3 specific sources for gathering input: a survey, consulting and meeting with stakeholder and community groups in the community, and holding 3 public meetings. And that process was to take place between June and early of October of this year. So all of that was completed, and I'm here to help describe the results of what we found in that 3-strand input process. But first, I want to thank everyone who participated in the input. We had a great, I think, level of participation in the survey, and all the folks who opened their doors to welcome us to their community group meetings, and those who showed up at public meetings, and those who forwarded the information on to others in their networks to help gather input, to help inform you all for decisions going forward. I just really want to thank everyone for taking the time to do that. Also, there's a full report that's over 80 pages long for anyone who wants to read the finer details of what we found. That report breaks down our findings by each strand of input: the survey, the community groups that we consulted, as well as the public meetings, and ties it all together in summaries in some of our larger findings. The executive summary, that is the blue handout that folks have here today, is at the most 30,000 foot level of what we uncovered in that public input process. So I'm going to walk through some of the largest highlights, I think, that help inform this discussion as we go forward around strategies. So the first thing I want to point out is that there were 500 people who responded to our survey, which was translated into 4 languages other than English: Vietnamese, Russian, Spanish, and Somali. There were 39 groups, stakeholder and community groups, that were consulted, with over 300 people participating in those conversations. And then we held 3 public meetings between July, August, and September, where over 100 people attended. Among survey respondents, the majority were community members, parents, foster parents, teachers, administrators, researchers, folks who are not associated with service providing. There were those, but the majority were non-service providers. Among the groups that we consulted, the stakeholder and community groups and the public meetings that we held, the majority of participants there were associated with service providers, both those that we currently fund through our grants and those that we don't. The next thing I want to cover are the sort of what we think of as the 5 kind of headlines from all 3 sources of input that we gathered. So these are the things that kind of came up most frequently and with sort of the most resounding chorus behind them in all of the strands individually and across the strands. So the first is that whether people were talking specifically about the types of services that they wanted to see funded in our program areas or were speaking in sort of more general terms, there was a clear preference and priority among participants in our input process for intensive, longer duration relationship-based services. And in addition, there was a very clear message that they wanted the services funded to be focusing on populations who have the least opportunity for the types of advantages that produce positive outcomes. So not necessarily focused on all children, but specific populations at risk for negative outcomes. There was a very clear preference for supporting services that are culturally responsive and culturally specific, where culture is integrated into informing service delivery. There was a very clear need called out for professional development in all of our program areas, such that the people doing the work on the ground continue to receive the tools they need to do their job with confidence and of high quality, because it's an ever-changing field, all of these fields, and the work that they're doing is always challenging. Working with folks with very high needs and children with high needs is incredibly challenging work, and in order to feel supported and confident, they ask that we continue to keep in mind supporting professional development going forward. And then fifth, that we do our grant making in the future in the context of understanding that there are other system level efforts occurring in our community and in our state that are unfolding in a similar timeline under which we'll be making grants in this community as well, so that we keep those in mind and that we sort of inform our grant making based in that context. The next few things I want to kind of discuss are that there were the topics that we gathered input around were both program area specific, and I'll get into those in a minute, and then they crossed sort of these broader topic areas that applied across all of our program areas or across the levy in general. And there were themes that came up in equity, in program quality, and in systems issues that are outlined in our report and in the executive summary. And I'm not going to talk about all of them today in the interest of time, but they are things that helped inform the rationale for the strategy directions that you'll be presented today. And they are also things that we'll be bringing back to you to help structure sections of our request for investment documents that guide the instructions for applications. So things that we heard around equity and quality will be incorporated into how we draft those requests for investment documents and into our funding process generally. So we'll be coming back, staff will be coming back to you in November and December with more specifics on that, operationalizing that out of input. And in addition, there are quality improvements and sort of accountability structures and changes that we want to do based on that input in the future. So we'll talk about that more. I'm going to move kind of quickly through the themes that came up in the program area specific community input, because a lot of what you're going to hear here is echoed by what we suggest in the strategy directions for each of the program areas, because so much of what we're suggesting is informed by what we learned in public input. But before I get into these, I just want to kind of remind everyone again that we asked specific questions in each of the sort of 3 strands of input that we used. We asked specific questions about what folks wanted prioritized in terms of services, or to whom or where in the community for each of our program areas. And so those specific questions are what resulted in these findings that I'm about to present to you. In addition, I want to remind everyone that for each of our program areas, well over the majority of respondents in the 3 sort of streams of input that we gathered asked that we prioritize certain at-risk populations in those areas. And so that's included on these slides. I'm not going to run through all of them specifically right now, but I want to kind of just help you all keep in mind that it wasn't the case that people were asking that services be directed to all kids in Portland, but that they were really calling out specific populations depending on the program area. So in early childhood, the 4 types of services that rose to the top as preferences across the input are high-quality preschool and Head Start, intensive home visiting services, activities that help support and develop and strengthen parenting, and early childhood mental health supports, which help guide and provide tools to teachers and parents to support children's behavior. In child abuse prevention and intervention, the 2 most frequently mentioned and services that rose to the top in public input were intensive, comprehensive parenting education and supportive services, as well as a huge chorus saying prevention is needed over intervention in this particular program area. For foster care, the 4 things that rose to the top were intensive and continuous support for youth while they're in foster care, as well as those who are aging out of foster care. There was quite a huge need for training and support for foster parents identified. In addition, people are interested in having greater educational support for children who are in foster care for their academic success and success in school. And then also, as you heard earlier, services that lead to permanency in the life of foster children. And after school, the highest preference was for services that support academic success and provide academic supports to children, for enrichment programming, things like arts, science and technology specific programming, other sports and activity programming, for programming that occurs during the summer to support children in those months when they're not in school, and then also for the Sons Community Schools model. In mentoring, the 3 themes that rose to the top regarding services were that there be greater focus, intentional focus of the mentoring relationships and mentoring services on academic achievement of the youth who are being mentored, that there be greater use of mentoring as a source of support for youth to pursue secondary education or career goals, and that the mentoring services tend to favor longer-term and more intensive relationships. And then lastly, on hunger relief, remember, is a new program area for us, so we haven't provided grants toward this end before. And the 4 largest themes in public input there were increased access and use of existing hunger relief services and structures, so helping augment and bring more children and families into those systems. Increased use for summer food access, increasing the number of school food pantries in our community, and then ways to feature nutrition and cooking education in the services that are provided. And that is, at the 30,000-foot level, the themes that generated the findings that we had from the public input process. Are there any questions that you all have about this? I understand it's a lot of information that we prepared and provided.
It was a lot of work, too, for
was.
your staff and for the Children's Levy staff and my office staff who were involved in helping many of the meetings. So, Any questions of Meg on the community input?
I do have one question.
Yeah, sure.
Can you elaborate a little bit more on the relationship-based services? So is that more like people that are there and it wouldn't be more so for people that are coming in for one-time services, or how is that?
That's exactly, yes. What we understood from what people were saying was, yes, that there is a higher preference for things where there's an ongoing relationship between the child and the family, and staff or someone associated with the service being provided, or that is the service, as opposed to a drop-in, one-time only type of service. There was a much greater sort of preference towards things where there's a sustained relationship over time, and the child or the family are supported over time in some type of goals and change and growth. Does that help?
Was there any thought that if someone comes in for a one-time, that after you get into talking with them, that it might extend into something that could be learned longer, or was that not a consideration?
I think it's just important to keep in mind that this is just the summary of public input. I don't think anyone, I can't speak on behalf of what people were sort of thinking when they gave their input. That's just sort of the theme that we saw in what people said. I don't think it means that there isn't a place for one-time only services. It's more just that the majority of what we heard in the input that we gathered was for those more relationship-based, more intensive types of services.
Other questions for Meg? Okay, well, great, thanks, Meg, and we'll move right into our next area, and that is the discussion of the allocation of funds between our various program areas. Welcome, Lisa.
Hello. Okay, so I'm going to introduce it. In addition to all the input that Meg just went through, we also asked for input on how the revenue should be divided up between program areas. And just to sort of set the frame, since I realize I'm speaking to a committee that mostly has never made these allocations before, the reason that we need to do this is that's sort of the resources that once we get the pie from Josh Harwood, when he tells us what the pie is likely to be, we divide that pie up and we put that money into separate RFIs for the different program areas. And when we make the funding decisions, we sit here with a spreadsheet that has that figure, and then, I mean, provided it's not updated any further after January, which usually it isn't, that's the figure that we start with when we allocate the funds. It also lets people in the community understand, okay, here's the pot of funds that I might be eligible to apply for. So that's the reasons that we have to divide the money up ahead of time. And why we've done so in the past. So that's sort of where we're heading. We need to have that done by the time we publish the RFIs in January. Just to give folks a little bit of history on this, I don't like to spend too much on history, but since folks are new, in general, in the last funding round, when we confronted the committee with this question and when we took public input on the question, the public input generally advised that we roughly divide the money between a third for early childhood, a third for child abuse and foster care, and a third for after school and mentoring. Those were the program areas at the time, and that was pretty much the public input. The committee had a lot of discussion about it. There was, when I went back to look, I'd sort of forgotten about that, but eventually ended up more or less agreeing with that and divided the money roughly up into those areas, and then further divided it between child abuse and foster care and after school and mentoring, with larger portions going to child abuse and after school and smaller portions going to foster care and mentoring. So this time, again, we asked the same question. We asked this question on the survey in a written format, which was the same as we did last time, because trying to take sort of oral input on that doesn't really work, we discovered. So we did it on paper and had people divide up and write down what they thought, how they thought we should divide up the money. So Meg, the master of survey data, looked at all that data and basically took out all the responses where people either didn't answer the question or where people said 100% should go to one category, because that's not an option. We have to, under the ballot language, fund all of the categories that are listed. So we must make an allocation to all 6 areas. So what the people who said 100% said is relevant in the sense of what do people in the community might prefer. However, it's not relevant so much in terms of the allocations between the categories that we have to make. So just so you understand, of the 500 survey responses that Meg referred to recently that we received, we had 342 responses that gave valid input on this question that we could consider. And of those 342, more than half were community members and less than half were service providers. So just so you understand kind of the audience that was responding. If Meg, you got it up there, great. So on the slide, and I guess probably on your screens as well, is kind of a little history document as well as a document as to what the current public input was. So on the left, you see what the 2009 allocation was. That's what the committee decided to do in 2009 with the resources that were available. What the responses in the center column are the mean responses, so the mean is an average response of the public input that we received this time around. So Meg took all the calculations and calculated means for those, and that's what's up there. And then on the right, you'll see the staff recommendation. So briefly, before we get into staff recommendations, I want to just make one other note. So as I said, there were a number of people that did not respond in a way that we could use their responses because they said more than 50% should go to one category. And of those, there's just a few things I think we could take away from the folks whose responses we couldn't use because of that. Half of them indicated that no fund should be invested in foster care, mentoring, or hunger. So these were the least prioritized amongst the folks who wanted to put all the money into something. Now, as we said, that's not an option, but just to get you, so you understand that. And that, I think there was
What were the three again? Hunger,
mentoring, and foster care. Conversely, about a third indicated that more than 50% should go for early childhood. So you have a significant faction that said we should invest quite out of proportion in early childhood, if you want to think of it that way. So those are the folks whose responses are not reflected up there. So just to make that clear, that's what those numbers apply to. So staff, as you can see, has come out a little bit differently than public input, and I wanted to give you the reasons why we're making that recommendation so you can understand why it differs. The first was in keeping somewhat in line with historical allocations. We were aiming at making our recommendation roughly about a third again for those for the main categories that have been historically included in our investments, while also reducing each of that, so it's not a third will be 33.3%. We reduced them all somewhat to try to create a pool for hunger because hunger is a new program area. We need to obviously have funds in that category. We lowered the percentage of funds for mentoring and foster care slightly to reflect the public input that I just told you, where folks had a decreased preference for those two categories as compared to the three early childhood, after school, and child abuse. We recommend keeping early childhood higher than so the level of investment higher in early childhood than public input suggests, primarily because of research which shows that investing early is your best bet. You're going to get the best return on your investment, about 7-to-1 is what the research out of the Minnesota Federal Reserve shows. So I think we as staff strongly have supported for the entire time we've been here a high level of investment in early childhood services. We kept after school and child abuse similar to the mean, so you can see that our recommendations are pretty close to what the mean of public input recommended, also close to the historical allocation, and also because these were the two most competitive funding areas last time. The most people applied for money in these categories, so you have the stiffest competition last time. And hunger relief, we recommended a lower percentage for a couple of reasons. First, it's a new area. One thing we've realized is when we're going into a new area and we're increasing capacity of existing programming rather than supporting ongoing increased capacity over time, is that programs have to ramp up to do that, and they often are not able to use funds as quickly as they anticipate. So we often find that we have money left over in those program areas when we're starting something new, and that was certainly the case with foster care. So that was the primary reason. The other thing that I would ask you to keep in mind, I mean, sometimes there, as Josh just gave his financial report, occasionally there are increased revenues above what the economist thinks will likely accrue to the fund. And in that case, we are in a position to allocate those resources further down the process, so after the initial grants are made. And if the committee wanted to sort of direct any future increased revenues that we're not anticipating having at this moment into that funding category to increase the percentage over time, that could be one way to sort of ramp resources up, in a way that hopefully they can be used adequately in the community. So that's sort of the rationale for the staff's recommendation. Our thought would be that, we'd answer any questions you have about our recommendations, and then we would take public testimony on this issue. We'll get kind of a show of hands and try to understand how many people want to testify on this issue, and then we'll have to figure out how much time each person can have based on that, considering that we have another set of things we need to bring to you and another set of testimony that folks might want to give on the proposed strategy directions. So that's kind of the process that we outlined for the short term here. Can I answer any questions on our recommendation or our rationale or on the public input that we received if something wasn't clear before we start hearing testimony?
Well, I think one thing I want to make sure is clear that you mentioned in your statement that you had to reduce percentages in order to fund hunger relief. And while that's true, because everything has to add up to 100%, your recommendation and the commitments I made in seeking renewal of the levy is funding hunger will not come at the expense of the dollars committed to the other 5 program areas. And at your recommendation level, that statement is true. So,
And again, we don't have dollars to work with. We only have projections, and we have our guesses as to what those might be. But yes, the recommended level that the percentage of the possible revenues we might have. So I'm speaking pretty.
no, but I'm
What's the
talking
word I
in
want?
an absolute, we had $8.4 million this year for the children's levy programs. And
Well, that was
so-
what the projected revenues. Actuals are going to be more than that.
Yeah, so I mean,
Yeah.
I guess my point is that even though there is a percentage carved out for hunger relief, there is not a dollar loss to the other program areas under our projections.
It's all how you want
New
to think of it,
funding-
Dan.
It's new, unanticipated funding that will be going towards hunger relief.
Unanticipated, I guess. Okay.
Yeah, okay. I just want to make sure that's
It's-
clear, because people could come away from your presentation thinking that dollars that were previously allocated to the other areas are going to hunger relief, and that's not the case. It's unanticipated revenues that will be going towards hunger relief. Increments of unanticipated revenue. So, anyway, I
Yes.
just wanted to get that on the record.
Increments.
Okay. Other questions or comments? Okay.
I do
yeah,
have a
Mitch?
question, Lisa. I was struck by the comment that the fact that there were more applicants in one of the groups would influence a percentage allocation. And I wonder if you could expand on the rationale of how you tie those two together.
Well, basically, what we saw last time is so the allocation percentages were made at the front end, and that was how we proceeded in making the funding decisions, and we put a certain amount on. So there's $2 million to allocate in this category, and we go from there. But what happened in areas where, in funding areas where there was tremendous competition, there were many, many more programs that applied that then could receive funding. And then like, for instance, after school and mentoring decisions were made in the same meeting last time. The committee chose to move funding that had been allocated to mentoring over to after school because there were so many more applicants in the after school category than mentoring. So the actual funding percentage that was allocated in the end was slightly less in mentoring than what had been anticipated because the competition was less. So I think it does influence what people. I think it shows in part demand. So demand, for services in particular funding areas, and it also there is just tremendous pressure when you're sitting in a room trying to allocate funds when there's so many programs looking for money as opposed to fewer. So I think that's really where we were coming from. There was foster care and mentoring had the fewest applications last time around. Child abuse and after school had the most. So that is partly a function, obviously, of providers that are coming forward with applications, but also I think reflects. It reflects many complex situations. I don't want to oversimplify it, but I think that was the how the committee reacted to that situation last time.
Can I ask a question to that? Yeah. So there was more people applying.
Excuse me, sir. Could you just talk into the microphone? I think it's hard.
I'm
for
sorry.
people to- Yeah.
Since there was more people and there were more applications for after school and child abuse, was there any different? Did they make any difference? So was the child abuse numbers decreased because you had all these organizations and they received this money? So was there a decrease in the number of children with child abuse or prevention? So I'm trying to say, was there a return on investment? I should say. So we funded these programs. So what was the difference? Was the outcome any different? Was it better in doing it that way?
Well, there's many ways to look at outcomes. So that would take the rest of this meeting for us to discuss in full and give it a proper hearing. And I think the best way I can answer it shortly is that we do measure outcomes for all the programs that we fund, and some of the programs that are specifically directed at helping families, not like families who were sent to the hotline, who had hotline calls made on them, who then received services, didn't receive further hotline calls. That's one of the outcomes that we track. So they were not re-reported for child abuse or neglect. So for programs that are doing that type of service specifically, where you can measure that type of outcome, then we do measure it. There are many types of outcomes around prevention.
Right.
So a family hasn't been reported for abuse and neglect, and ideally you do want to support them and not ever have that happen. So we provide a fair amount of programming that looks at that, that does that, and we measure outcomes that are specific to that. And we report on those on an annual basis. Because you've just joined the committee, you haven't heard that report yet. You will hear it shortly when we get time. Okay. But so I mean, in terms of if you're talking about collective impact on the child abuse rate, there are many things that go into that. It's also
right, but I'm just talking about for this one. So was there any recidivism with those families that were receiving any help? So if you were helping, if an organization was helping them with child abuse and they received money, were those families helped, and did they come back into the system, or did it, kind of offset it?
Honestly, the way I have to answer that is to give you data on the outcomes that we collected. I can't just answer that kind of off the cuff if that doesn't feel fair to me. So I mean,
that's fine.
I would be happy to go over that with you, and that's something that we usually sort of do an annual report, typically December, and won't probably happen this year, but you'll get that data soon. So yes, I would say outcomes are generally positive. Not every program measures that exact outcome because they're doing different things.
Okay. I didn't mean
Makes
to put
sense.
you on the spot.
No worries. I just
Questions or
It's a longer
comments before we move to public testimony? Okay. Maybe we can get a show of hands. How many people are interested in testifying on this subject area? So I see about 5 people, 6 people. I think there's 3 chairs there, so why don't you come up 3 at a time? Yeah, we'll, So welcome, and if you could just give us your name. If you're affiliated with an organization, you can give us that too. You don't have to. And you'll each have 2 minutes, and there's a timer right in front of you. And why don't we start with you on the...
Well, actually, I'm starting.
Okay.
Coordinated.
You've already coordinated. Okay.
Yeah.
We'll start with
Hi.
you in the middle then.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Sarah Tolfs, and I'm from Oregon Mentors. I'm really pleased to be here today. Thank you. I'm here actually in support of about 45 mentoring programs in the Portland area, many of which are here today. I'd like to ask them quickly to stand just so that you can see who's in the room in support of mentoring, so if you can stand. Thank you. Okay. So these programs are all designed differently, but they have one major thing in common, and that's that relationship is the intervention that they use in their program. I'd like to share a couple of ideas that articulate why using research to inform youth programming is important. First, last year, 2 researchers from the University of Pittsburgh wrote a journal article noting that across intervention settings, the active ingredient of all effective interventions is the presence of strong relationship. This holds true in the classroom, in a foster care setting, in mentoring, in home visitation programs, and even food aid programs. Kids must have strong relationships for all of these interventions to work. Like we heard earlier, the community has a preference for strong relationship-based intervention. That is mentoring. Good evidence-based mentoring programs, like the ones in this room, take time and energy to put together. We really appreciate your continued support of them. Please consider how relationship is the key intervention across all of these strategies, that research shows that mentoring works, and that mentoring is a good investment. It's my pleasure to introduce to you a longtime supporter of mentoring and youth programs in our community, and one of our board members, Ken Thrasher.
Thank you. I'm Ken Thrasher, founder of Oregon Mentors and board member and past board member of Friends of the Children. And I just want to talk a little bit about, I think, what you all are dealing with today with the mentoring allocation. You know, when I looked at that going from 13 to 10%, that's a 23% reduction when we're adding an 8% program to the mix. So if I just did the back of the envelope numbers, I was thinking maybe we get 92% toward mentoring or about 12%. So this is a pretty significant cut to a program that I think, if you look statewide and you look in Portland specifically, only about 25% of our kids are getting mentors that need mentors based on our research. And these 5 key themes that you touched on, and the 3 specific themes around the mentors, mentoring needs, they all are very specific to the programs we're working with and dealing with. And so I know that fewer applications and community need expressed kind of set the benchmark for how this was done, But I think you have to actually go and look at community need and quality-based programs. I think you started to talk about that on outcomes and ROI, and many of these programs are having great return on investment, keeping our kids out of teen pregnancy, keeping them out of the criminal and juvenile justice system, and to disinvest, I think, in mentoring at a time when we have increased poverty and greater need, and it is the tiebreaker in many cases for breaking the cycle of poverty. We just need to stay the course with these high-quality programs and make sure we invest in them in the way that we have in the past, because I really do think they are life changers for many of our youth. I've seen the benefits of it in the young people I've worked with and was mentored personally as a young man. And I think getting this back to about a 12% level would be really meaningful for these programs. Thank you.
I'm Julie Larson. I'm here from Friends of the Children, and I've also been a long-term supporter and affiliate with Oregon Mentors as well. And thank you very much for this opportunity to give input on the allocation of funds. I know that we hesitate to start talking dollars and numbers because we don't know where that's going to land, but what we do see is that the revenue picture is improving based upon several different estimates that have been put forth. Mentoring sustained a cut as all of the other areas did in the last funding round, and in the current and final year of this levy cycle, mentoring already receives the lowest investment from the Portland Children's Levy. With the revenue picture improving, there's room, in my opinion, for us all to be able to benefit from that and not have any one category benefit and have someone else be at risk of a cut. I also have done a little bit of looking on available resources on the Levy's website, and mentoring grantees are currently serving more than 1,600 children with the current level of support with the Levy, and that represents about 20% of the children that are being served with Levy dollars. I have great respect for the really hard work that the staff has put into the process of making the recommendations, but would also like to piggyback on my two colleagues here and propose an alternative of seeing a allocation of at least 11.5 to 12% for the mentoring category. On behalf of Friends of the Children in particular, we do provide long-term intensive relationships, and again, as the public input has said, that long-term intensive relationships are one of their priorities. We serve nearly all low-income families. 75% are children of color, 85% high school completion rate, while 50% of them have parents who did not complete high school. 98% avoid teen parenting, while 60% were born to a teen parent. 97% avoid the juvenile justice system, while 60% have at least one parent who have had a history of incarceration. So I think some of those statistics do tell the story. Again, thank you very much, and thank you for your consideration.
Thank you. Okay, next three? I thought there were three more out there. Do you want to talk? Great, so welcome, and all you have to do is give us your name and organization you're affiliated with if you wish, and you each have 2 minutes.
Yes. Good afternoon, Commissioner and Marissa and Serena and Mitch. I'm Shabri Vickers. I'm the Director of Community Relations and Diversity Programs for Big Brothers Big Sisters Columbia Northwest. I'm excited to be here today specifically as we were talking about the allocation of funds and the strategic direction for program areas. We believe in the intentionality of focusing on youth academic achievement and furthering future life goals around education and career. At Big Brothers Big Sisters, our North Star is what we call Finish Strong, which is the backbone of the relationships we establish through promoting education and ensuring our mentors are strong advocates to support children to succeed and finish high school strong. This comes directly from the results that we are already seeing and that have made an impact in the Portland that you all live in today. A few stats just to keep us awake. In 2013, 96% of our little brothers and sisters who had a big brother or sister during their senior year graduated on time. 100% of our little brothers and sisters of color who had a big brother or sister during their senior year graduated on time. The average match length was 5 years. The longest match had been meeting for 10 years. 86% had their big brother or big sister during the junior and senior year of high school. These are strong bonds. We have 106 freshmen who have just entered high school, and we cannot forget them as we decide upon these allocations. Mentoring works and investment makes sense. If you survey someone between early childhood, child hunger, and mentoring, a mentor relationship may not be top of mind, but helping our children succeed in school is. We understand that the urgency for early childhood investment is important, but let's not forget the kids who are sitting in classrooms as we speak here today. In my opinion, more discussion is needed before we can make an adequate case for making a reduced investment in mentoring. Number of applications does not equal impact. I will close by saying that we are here to advocate for the 11.5% allocation in the least. Thank you.
Thank you. Mark?
Hello again, Mark McKechnie from Youth Rights and Justice. I certainly understand it. When you take responsibility for a budget, there's one guaranteed outcome, is that you'll make somebody unhappy. So I might please take my comments with that understanding in mind. But I am here to speak in favor of increasing the allocation to the foster care program. I think there are a number of reasons to do that, which I can't get into in 2 minutes, but I do think it's important to recognize that this cycle was a startup cycle, and the foster care system is incredibly complex. And while some organizations were not ready to hit the ground running, some of us were, because we've been working with that system for decades already. I also want to share my insight as someone who tries to raise revenue for services that are directed primarily towards foster kids. Is most of the public, and even many people who work with children and families in other ways, do not understand the foster care system, who it serves, how it works, what it does. So it does not surprise me in the slightest that this was rated a lower priority or even zero priority by some people. But my concern is that the methodology, which no methodology is perfect, only amplifies that effect if it's used to determine the allocation for this program area. And I think the people who rated it as low priority probably don't recognize that by not serving this population well, we are guaranteeing that some children will not go to college or graduate. Only 2.7% of foster children get a 4-year degree. They're more likely to be receiving welfare or food stamps or other types of public assistance. They're more likely to go to prison, more likely to be on the street and experience homelessness, and more likely to become parents of foster children of the future. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Sir?
Hi, my name is Tim Hennessy. I'm the Executive Director of CASA, and CASA stands for Court-Appointed Special Advocates. And with the word advocate there at the end, I would be remiss if I didn't sit here and try to advocate for foster care. To Mark's point, it is a very misunderstood world that these kids are thrust into, typically to no fault of their own. And I just want to make sure we have never, as an organization, after 30-some years being in existence, have never applied for the Portland Children's Levy. So we're going to give it a good show of trying to receive some funds this time. And the thing that I want to make sure that you understand is that we do, in a sense, play a mentor role, but we are sworn advocates by the court to stand up for these children. And again, to Mark's point, most people don't know what the world is like for these kids when they're in this world. And because of the over 400 CASAs that I have that work with me, we're there side by side with these kids as they go through this incredible journey. And I just would ask, as you go through your deliberation, that you look at an organization that has not applied before for funding in the category of foster care and invest in what we think is a proven and effective program. Thank you.
Thanks, Tim. Thank you all. Is there anybody else that wishes to testify? Okay. I see 2 more hands raised. Come on up. 3? Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. You wanted to? Okay. Go ahead. You 3 come up, and then we'll take you next. So yes, welcome. Again, just give us your name. If you're with an organization, you can give us that name too if you wish, and you each have 2 minutes. So start with you, ma'am.
All right. My name is Rebecca Lowcamp. I'm with FRC Team 1432 After School Mentoring, Tutoring, and Workforce Training Program. I would just like to advocate that you support mentoring more. We work with at-risk children in Southeast Portland. Actually, we cover all of the east side. And children in that area are entering the 9th grade 3 grade levels behind in English and math skills. You cannot expect them in the short time that they are in high school to advance enough to be ready to enter the college program without intensive mentoring and work with advocates for their academic education. Our program has graduated 98% of all the students who have come through in the 10 years that we've been in existence. 89% of those students have gone on to college or an advanced vocational training program, as compared to the 62% of the local high school. I just can't speak strongly enough for the need for support of mentoring and after-school programs for these students. Not all of them do go to college, but we can get them on a professional career path if we help them catch up from where they've been. It's not their fault.
Thank you.
Thank you for this opportunity. My name is Abinat Haile. I work for ERCO Africa House. The program I work for is called the African Immigrant Mentoring Program, and I'm here to advocate for the program because it's a program that none like it that there's no other mentoring program to help the African immigrant and refugee youth, whom we've been working for the last 4 years, going on to 5th year, that we have seen the change and the improvement in the youth that participated is tremendous. Our youth have been, the graduates of this last June, all have gone to college because of participating in this program. Some have been advancing to outstanding universities in the United States. I'm here to advocate for this program because the African youth, there's no other program that supports them to help them to advance, to set goals for the future, because they're being served by people who've gone through what they are going through right now. And so I'm standing here for them to see if there's a way to save or even not to cut these funds, because from last year, from the year 3 to year 4, we had to cut some youth because of funding. So we are hoping that this will continue. This is the only hope. They call it home away from home when they come to Africa House. They can talk to us. We can support them with the mentoring, with the mentors that they have. So to help these youth, this is the program. This is the only program that there is. And right now we're serving 50 youth, and we have more than 200 kids that are on waiting lists. So we are, I'm saying, please let this mentoring program continue. We need it.
Thank you. Sir.
Thank you. I'm Michael Conway with the Community Cycling Center, and we work to broaden the access to bicycling and its benefits to all Portlanders. And I'm here to show strong support for the Levy themes and the allocation committed to, or hopefully committed to, after-school programs, such as the programs that work with Sun Community Schools, that promote physical activities, that work with families of low income, and partnerships with such as ERCO, New Columbia, or Hacienda CDC. Bike Club, like our program and other after-school programs, really are about creating opportunities for the participants in those programs. Our programs specifically work at not only creating a recreational benefit, but also creating a healthy economic, environmental, social, significant opportunities to community members from families of low income and underserved communities. And I want to say thank you very much for having me here, and really strong support of the after-school program and strong support of the allocation that's already being put forth. Thank you.
Okay, thank you all. Oh, ma'am, you in the back. You're our last one.
There's somebody else. Come on.
Oh, okay.
For a second here. In the interest of time, so there are all the strategies. There are 6 program areas. There are a lot of strategies, and I know a lot of people here would like to give some, and some of this input is actually related to that too. And so I'm wondering whether, because one of the things we're going to do is allow people to comment further for another week after this meeting in writing. If we might want to move on, because we're going to be truncating the amount of input we can take on the program areas. Can folks be willing, or else say it in a minute so we can do it quickly? Those are the options. Written input, 1 minute?
30 seconds.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
Can you match that?
Show of hands.
Can you match or beat that?
Amount of time.
1 minute, okay. We got three.
Keep increasing.
3 1 minutes, and then, as Lisa said, we're not making a decision today, so we're just taking testimony, and you will have opportunities to submit written testimony, and you probably will want to testify on our next agenda item as well. So, great. Why don't we start with you? And again, just give us your name and organization if you wish, and you have 1 minute.
Thank you. My name is Leslie Nelson. I am the Child Hunger Prevention Manager for Partners for Hunger Free Oregon. We are a hunger and advocacy nonprofit here in Portland, and we work statewide to prevent childhood hunger across the state. And I just want to say how excited I am that there are going to be levy dollars for hunger. I understand it is a new allocation, and therefore we want to be cautious. But I just want to make the point that there are so many existing federal child nutrition programs and so much amazing existing infrastructure in the city of Portland for delivering food to hungry kids that I would caution that potential 8% allocation could be higher, only that there are so many wonderful programs and partnerships that the county programs, the Oregon Food Bank, my organization, the local school districts, we all are already working very tightly together, and we will be able to implement additional funds very quickly, feed more children very quickly. And so I am very confident that we could do that, and I just would advocate for our existing programs and partnerships very heartily. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I am Vaughn Albanese, Executive Director of Friendly House in Northwest Portland, and I wasn't going to get up here at all today, but I felt the competitive spirit coming over me when I was hearing a lot about programs like mentoring and foster care, but really nothing about early childhood and after school, which we consider to be prevention programs. And I'm just going to tell you a very quick story about the importance of prevention. We had a fall luncheon the other day, and a young girl spoke who was 12 years old and had been through our preschool and after school program after her mom left her dad because of abusive situation, and they moved into transitional housing at Friendly House. And so she was able to be a part of our preschool and then be a part of our after school program, which had been funded by PCL for a number of years. This girl has come out the other side a winner. She is going places, and that's because consistently, day after day after day, she was able to come to our programs, and I'm putting in a good word for prevention. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Helen Ying.
Could you push the button, Helen, in front of you there? Yeah.
Is that good?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm Helen Ying, and I am a part of the East Portland Action Plan Education Subcommittee. And I've had a background in education myself for 30 years, and I'm just hurrah, hurrah, rah-rah for Children's Levy. And listening to all the testimonies today, I just felt important that we also look at how do we ensure that more people know about this opportunity, because we keep doing the same thing the same way, we get the same results. So, and we know, reading the book Half the Sky, the people who are closest to community serve can do the best job in helping them. So I'm wanting to just highlight the information that we already shared with, I think, the people who is in charge of this Children's Levy, to make sure that the process of application is open, and that even it might be accepted in the people's own language if it's just not in their first language, if it's not in English, and use the selection criteria that would include free reduced lunch guidelines, and to address and racial and ethnic disparities. And the selection criteria should be transparent, and it should be made public even before the application, so that people know how to make sure that they could be part of, be selected according to those guidelines, and that the scoring process be transparent as well. So I guess what I'm saying is, so that more people in our city would know about how to apply, so not the same group should apply year after year.
Okay, thank you all. Okay, we can move right into the next area, or do the allocation committee members want a 5-minute break?
We need to take a break, so can we do a few things before we take a break? There's going to be a break.
Okay.
Can I just get you for 5 more minutes and then we can take a break?
We don't have to take a break if there's no desire to take a
There,
break.
in order to organize the testimony for the next section, there'll need to be a break. We realized that otherwise it was going to be so disjointed, you were going to be hearing things from all over the place, that we'd try to group the input by program area so that you can hear the strategies, then you can hear the testimony, and then we can move to the next area.
Okay.
In order to organize that, we need 5 minutes. So you'll get your 5 minutes, whether you want or not, I guess.
Okay.
Do you want to hit the next? Okay, thanks. You know what, I wanted to sit next to the computer so I can remember what I'm saying. So the next.
So, yeah, why don't you tee up what this next subject area is?
Yeah, so we're moving on to strategies. And just to be clear, we are going to take written, for anybody who wanted to give testimony, didn't get a chance to give testimony on anything today, we will for another week take written testimony, and we will summarize all of that written testimony and the oral testimony for the committee members and circulate that before we meet again. So just for process-wise to clarify, because we knew that we didn't know how many people are going to come, so we never know how much testimony there might be. So for strategies, moving on to strategies, so the point of doing a lot of this public input, and one of the things we discussed with the committee as we approached public input was to move toward a more focused and a little bit more tailored investment strategy for the next set of funding applications. So the reason to do that is to try to assure that applications are addressed to particular strategies, to try to increase your impact by narrowing your focus, and then to do that by in consultation with the public. So what you just heard was try to sort of really informed where we went with those strategies, about what are and the questions that we asked people were, what is most important to you? There are many things we could do for people, many things we could invest in. What do you think is the most important, and which groups ought we direct these services toward? So that's what informed the sort of formation of the strategies. So one of the sort of the common elements, as I just said, what we used was community input. We also looked at research, so you'll see that reflected in the rationales. We looked at the local data. We sent around kind of local data reports a couple weeks before this meeting for people to kind of get a sense of what the local stats were, to the extent you weren't unfamiliar with it. And then also other systems efforts as well. So what other kind of community efforts are going on in a program area that would inform what we do. So that's kind of the piece that or the pieces, I should say, that inform how we made those strategies. The last piece I want to just remind people of as we go forward, the strategies are the things that we would do. That's what we're talking about. What kinds of things would we fund in these program areas, and for whom and where? There are other things so if some of you folks haven't been through the whole process, we have a funding application, a request for investment. There are questions that we ask in that request for investment that many people gave input on during this process, and we are going to get to that input, but we're not discussing that today. So I just want to, as a placeholder, try to deflect folks who are coming up to testify not to go down that road about things we ought to put in the request for investment, and particularly things about culturally competent, culturally responsive, and culturally specific programming, and about quality, best practices, proven programs. There are whole sections of the RFI that we devote to those very topics, and every person who applies for money through the levy has to answer those questions, and you all will get to decide exactly how those questions look, and we will be looking at that, starting to look at that at the next meeting. But that's something that would apply to anybody, to anyone who's looking for money. So I just wanted to remind people, for anyone in the audience who hasn't been through the application process as well as you all, that those are questions we're going to take up, but we're going to be taking them up the next couple of meetings. So onward to strategies. Just to make clear how we can do this, so the allocation committee will get a brief break, and what we'll do is have people sign up to testify by program area, and the staff will get up and talk about the strategies that were proposed for that program area. Everything's in writing. Everything's available online, so if you didn't get it for some reason, there's paperwork you can take a look at in the break. We will try to divide the time for testimony to have as many people speak as possible during this meeting time, knowing the time is limited. We will take written testimony, as I said, for another week, and then we will summarize all that testimony and provide that to the committee. And then at the next meeting, at the November meeting, we'll begin to discuss the strategy direction in light of what you all heard today and through written input as well. So that's kind of where we're heading. That'll open up the next meeting, and this is where folks can come up and do by program area. So we'll have sheets of paper, and then we'll try to divide up the time as best we can. If you don't get the chance to speak, we'll have information sent out to everybody on email so that you can provide written testimony. Does that all make sense?
Okay, so we'll take a 5-minute break. So we'll come back at 2:15. That is 2:15, right? Yeah, 2:15, and then people who wish to sign up to testify on a specific program area and the strategies that you may hear by staff, take this opportunity to do so, and the sign-up sheets are right here in front. Okay. Oh, paperwork's out in front of the chamber. Let's resume, and staff will now walk us through their proposed strategies for each one of our investment categories. And are you going to walk us through all the strategies and then do testimony, or?
We're going to walk through each one strategy at a time and then testimony for that strategy.
Okay.
Or excuse me, not one strategy at a time, one program area at a time.
One program area at a
all
time.
strategies within the program area and take testimony on the program area. And
Okay.
then go to the next one. But we'll go pretty quickly through the strategies in order to provide
Okay.
time. So within the early childhood program area, the three proposed strategies, first are intensive home visiting services for children who are prenatal to 3 years old. And the rationale behind that is to direct resources toward children, direct resources toward services that were highly identified in public input, that help support children in poverty and children at risk of not arriving ready for kindergarten, to be to have their parents supported through developing and strengthening parenting skills and understanding of the development of young children. It aligns well with other local efforts in the community, including the Cradle to Career Ready for Kindergarten Collaborative and the efforts of the state's Early Learning Hub. The second strategy is preschool services, Head Start, or structured preschool-like experiences for children who are 3 to 5 years old. Again, primarily the rationale for this strategy comes out of it being highly favored in public input. Research indicates that high-quality preschool and Head Start may be the most effective means for preparing young children for kindergarten. And providing preschool can be an expensive endeavor, and therefore staff is leaving room in this strategy, recommends leaving room in this strategy for activities that resemble preschool, that are community-based, that can serve low-income children with experiences that are similar to preschool in an effort to prepare children for kindergarten. And the third strategy in this program area is early childhood mental health consultation, which supports teachers, child care providers, and parents with tools and skills to understand and support child behavior, which is a key research-based intervention to help prepare children for school. Research in recent years has indicated that preschool expulsion rates are among the highest rates of expulsion of any age range, and this is mainly due to behavior. So consultation efforts help equip parents and child care providers and preschool teachers with the skills they need to get the behaviors they desire from children and help prepare them to be successful in their social interactions and behaviors in kindergarten. With that, I would love to open it up to public testimony for early childhood strategies.
Ken, I think you're the only one signed up.
Okay. Welcome. Again, just give us your name, your organization, if you're associated with one, if you wish to, and then you have 2 minutes.
Yes, my name is Ken Dale. I'm the Executive Director of the Peninsula Children's Learning Center. And we've been a Children's Levy program since its inception, and we've been very active in the Ready for Kindergarten Collaborative and the local learning, the new learning hub. We agree with all three strategies, except we think the first strategy needs to be enlarged a little bit more. The strategy about intensive home visiting for children prenatal to 3 years. It doesn't take into account of the working families who are not home to doc to get help for their children. Our program deals with from prenatal through preschool. We have over 60 families that are involved from the 6-week program to our toddler program, to our wobbler program, to our junior program, finally to our preschool program. If those families do not receive funding, they're not going to, they either have to stop working, or if they're working, they don't get anyone to come help them. And it just falls in line with, as they get ready to go on to the preschool program and then go on to kindergarten. The first 3 years, 3 to 6 years, is just as important. 0 to 3 is just as important from 3 to 5. And so we really encourage you to enlarge that strategy that will include not only with home visits, which we support 100%, but also more structured programs that deal with 0 to 3 that are geared towards working families who are not able to stay at home and have someone come visit them.
Okay, thank you. Okay, our next presentation, which child abuse prevention and intervention. Lisa Hansel.
Let me see if I can figure out how to move the screen for the next one. Thank you. Thank you. In this funding area, there are two strategies. The first is strengthen parenting skills and resilience. This would be parenting programs explicitly focused on reducing risk and enhancing protective factors. The rationale primarily came for this was heavily supported across all three strands of community input, as well as supported through research to a great deal. The second strategy is address trauma through therapeutic intervention. This would be services, primarily evidence-based and evidence-informed therapeutic services for children who have experienced child abuse and neglect or at high risk of child abuse and neglect. This was highlighted as a need across the surveys, not to the same extent in the other community input strands, and is definitely supported by research, especially the ACEs studies that are out currently, and the lifelong consequences of children having adverse childhood experiences and not dealing with those after the experience happens, has lifelong consequences in all realms of their life, social, emotional, and health consequences.
So, well, stay up there, Lisa, because I forgot to ask last time, do members of the committee have any questions of staff before we? Okay. So the address trauma through therapeutic intervention is an intervention?
Yes.
Strategy?
It's a strategy, yes.
Okay.
So there are two strategies.
Okay, good. Okay, who do we have signed up?
Kevin Dowling?
Welcome. So if you can just give us your name for the record and organization you're affiliated with, and you have 2 minutes.
Okay, thank you. My name's Kevin Dowling, and I work at CARES Northwest. We're a medical program that sees children for concerns of child abuse. And I just wanted to say, while I fully support the strategies that were outlined, I don't want us to lose sight of the importance of intervention, child abuse intervention. We see about 5 to 6 children every day at CARES Northwest for concerns of sex abuse, physical abuse, threat of harm, so kids that are living in domestic violence households or exposed to criminal activity. And I think that effective child abuse intervention is important for all the different strategies we're talking about today. If we don't effectively intervene with a child that's being sexually abused, they're not going to be successful in building relationships with other people. They're going to struggle in school. If we don't effectively intervene when somebody's sexually abusing a child and that person is still out in the community, those other children are at risk. And so just when I look at these priorities, please don't lose sight of the child abuse intervention piece. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, our next program area is foster care. Lisa Hansel.
All right, I know how to do this now. This program area, we have 3 strategies. Academic support for children in foster care, early childhood through college. Again, that came out as a priority through all 3 strands of the community input and is highly supported through research. Second strategy is support for youth in the transition to adulthood, ages 14 through 24. Again, this came loud and clear through community input as well as the research. And the third strategy in this area is permanency for youth. This means that every young person has a permanent family relationship. There are many different kinds of services and supports that can be help children get to that place. And again, this was supported in community input and research.
Questions for Lisa? Anybody? Okay, thanks. Who do we have signed up?
Just Elise Sanchez?
Welcome. You can just give us your name and organization if you're affiliated with one, and then you have 2 minutes.
Bonjour, good afternoon. My name is Elise Sanchez. I'm an enrolled member of the Little Shell Tribe, and I'm the Foster Care Services Manager at the Native American Youth and Family Center in Northeast Portland. I wanted to come up and speak to you today to applaud the efforts of the staff while they were strategizing in foster care to understand that permanency for youth doesn't look the same for every youth, especially in communities of color who are vastly overrepresented in the child welfare system. Our permanency might look a little different. We at Native Family Center are working not just to build relationships on a family level for our children, but to build relationships for them in the wider community. We find that our outcomes for our youth increase exponentially with every solid, loving adult that comes into contact with them. So I really applaud Portland Children's Levy staff for showing us that permanency doesn't just mean adoption. It doesn't just mean a permanent family for a youth. It means a permanent place in our community. And I would just urge you as our funding and allocation committee to continue to invest in Portland's most vulnerable youth at a high level. Thank you.
Thank you. Next program area is mentoring. Lisa Pellegrino.
There's no one signed up to talk, so I'll just run to the strategy. Okay, so 3 strategies for after school. First,
Can you pull the microphone a little closer?
Sorry, sure. Invest the bulk of the funds in intensive academic supports for school-age youth. Invest a smaller amount in enrichment programming. So enrichment programming is generally programming that's single focus. The 2 that were sort of most highlighted in public input were enrichment programs around physical activity and around the arts. So we'd recommend prioritizing those as well. And we would, third strategy is to invest a portion of funds, but limit those funds in increasing Sun Community Schools or allowing applications that propose to increase the number of Sun Community School sites, to use the Sun Equity Index in picking those sites, and to require some level of match for proposals that are coming forward to provide to ask us to continue to support the expansion of that system. The rationales for those for all of those strategies are both, as you know, pretty much consistently public input and research. With regard to the Sun strategy, that's particular also in light of what happened in the past when levy revenues significantly declined. Multnomah County generously took over funding Sun schools, the ones that we had been funding. So I think we should be cautious in our expansion of that system because if we ever, right now we're looking at a brighter economic picture, but one never knows when that might turn, as we experienced last time, to just make sure that we don't overextend ourselves because we had agreed to try to keep the funding for that service in particular at a consistent level in order to meet all system partners in that system who invest at a similar level. That's sort of part of the agreement that this committee had made in making those investments in the first place. So given that, it restricts your flexibility down the line. And I think we have to think a bit more carefully about how much we expand and how much funding we put into that going forward. So that's kind of where, that's a little bit different rationale, a little different than some of the other program areas. I don't know that anyone has actually
signed up. Does anyone want to speak on this?
On after
So,
school.
Your last point again, why don't you just reiterate your last point about being careful about how we expand, if we expand into new Sun community sites?
Just remembering that, so the way that this committee agreed a number of years ago to join all of the Sun System partners, which is a network of providers and people who are all funding that system, to keep the funding for sites at a consistent level so that we don't drop that funding. So, funding that we might give for other programs when we were forced to make cuts, we made percentage cuts to those programs. People adjusted in different ways. Some people serve fewer youth, some people raise money in other sources. There was different kinds of reactions to those cuts. When Sun Community Schools, one thing that the system partners agreed is that we wouldn't just keep lowering that down. We wouldn't fund a Sun Community School at $100,000 and then keep taking it down because there's a level at which you cannot keep a coordinator at a school and then you lose the program. It can't go forward. And so the Sun Coordinating Council has really worked, I think, to try to keep all sites operating, so trying not to close sites even in bad economic times, and to not thin the soup to a level where there is not a coordinator available anymore, in which case I'm not sure you could call it, they would say it's no longer a Sun Community School program. So that's something I just think we have to be more cautious about, given what just happened, with sort of radically reduced revenues very quickly, where we were forced to absorb cuts in a very short period of time. And unlike other funders, we have a discrete pot of funds. We don't have any other parts of the city we can go to or any other entities we can go to make up funding in a cut year. So that's a little bit more of a concern with this particular program area, because we agreed we would keep funding at a consistent level, and we did not drop below that even in the cuts. Okay. So that's where I think we have to be cautious next time around and not potentially obligate our other system partners to pick up those investments should the economy turn sour again.
Are there other questions?
Are there questions about that? I realize that Maurice has background, but not the rest of you may have less background in the Sun system and kind of how that operates. But
okay, we have Aaron Hubert, who wishes to testify. Did you have a question? Or?
Yeah, it'd just be great to get a little more background on the Sun system because.
Actually, you turned your microphone off.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, sorry.
There you go.
Two options is too confusing apparently. Can we get some background on the Sun schools, because it's a little confusing how the county picked up the funding, yet we're still committed to maintain a level, and so how it all ties together and what the go forward looks like would be great just to get a little background.
I mean, we are now currently not paying for any sort of the backbone support for a Sun school, which is the Sun coordinator, so paying for the lead agency to go into the school and organize the program at the school. We were funding 8 of those sites. The county picked those up because of the library district funding sort of amped their revenues up while cutting our revenues. So that was, right now we are not funding any of those. So when I say we agreed, there's a coordinating body that works for the whole Sun system. So that includes people from the Parks Department who are funding Sun schools. It includes representatives of the providers. It includes all of the school districts, because all of them at this point are putting in some cash resources as well as putting quite a lot of in-kind resource to keep that system operating and keep it whole, as well as the county, who's the most significant single funder in that system. So all those folks sit at a table and all agreed that we would, when we took sort of the proposal of that committee to this committee, that makes sense, a number of years ago, saying, if you're going to fund Sun schools, you're going to try to do the following things to keep them consistent, so that a Sun school that's funded by any different entity would look basically the same. I mean, yes, there's always some variation, but would have certain elements. And so we agreed to match that. So we require, if we fund a Sun program, we require the same basic elements that the county requires in funding that program, and we funded it at pretty much a consistent, at least at that level, in some cases slightly more, mostly at that level. So right now we don't have any current obligation. We are not currently funding any of those, so in that sense the obligation isn't there, but this committee did adopt that policy, if you will. So if we were to go forward in this next round, there are applications that will come forward, I have no doubt, to fund additional sites where there is currently no Sun programming available. I just think we have to proceed with a bit more caution, because we've ended up asking our partners to come in and help fulfill some of those obligations in years where revenues were considerably constricted or reduced. So does that answer the question? Okay.
Okay, Erin, just give us your name for the record and your affiliation, and you have 2 minutes.
Okay, thank you. I'm Erin Hubert, Executive Director for Boys and Girls Clubs. I'm really actually not here to advocate for the clubs or services, more just to thank you for the opportunity. I'm so respectful of the continuum of services that you're funding and the importance of that. I'm first advocating for that. I think it's terrific. We're privileged to be at the table in the after-school sector and working with Sun schools, and also to be there to help augment them where maybe resources are diminishing, or if there's any issues around this, to what Lisa was saying. So really, we're here to collaborate and be a part of the solution, and just very, very thrilled about this levy and the work that you do. And so just really wanted to come up and thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, our last area is...
Not last. Second to last.
Second to
Not
last. Well, I've lost count.
Just fifth in the order.
Lost count of our program areas.
We got one more after this. The mentoring proposed strategy direction is mentoring that focuses its supports on students' academic achievement or post-secondary pursuits. And the rationale for this strategy comes first from local data that high portions of youth in Multnomah County are not where they ought to be with academic indicators that would suggest that they would graduate on time, that they would be meeting state benchmarks in reading and math, or that they're connected to school and work beyond graduation. And for those indicators, the rates look worse for youth of color. Public input suggested a clear priority for these types of mentoring services, particularly for teens, to help them do better in school, stay in school, graduate from high school, and pursue post-secondary goals. Research in mentoring suggests that mentoring programs that focus more specifically on supporting youth around academic achievement, around academic success, around setting and pursuing post-secondary goals, produce those outcomes, are more likely to produce those outcomes than relationships that don't have that kind of associated or intentional focus. And again, this strategy aligns more closely with other efforts occurring in our community around these types of efforts to improve the results of academic indicators for at-risk youth. Any questions on this one?
Questions?
All right.
Somebody signed up?
Yeah, Matt from MFS.
Welcome. And just give us your name and your organization. You have 2 minutes.
My name is Matt Bartolotti, the Chief Strategy Officer for Metropolitan Family
Can you
Service.
pull one of those microphones?
Sure. Yeah. And I have a rather quick comment to make. When we reviewed the longer documents, it looked as though, and it was just pointed out, that mentoring strategies have a focus on youth or older youth, and it wasn't clear to us if that emphasis categorically excluded services for younger kids or mentoring or academically focused tutoring services for younger kids. And we want to recommend that that be clarified and the extent to which PCL funding will be available for those services for younger children be present in the strategy going forward. And that's the extent of my comments. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Matt. Then our last but not least program area, childhood hunger.
So 4 strategies proposed for hunger relief for the new program area. The first was increase access to and utilization of existing programs. So I think you heard somebody come up from Hunger Relief Task Force earlier who highly recommended that, and that was probably the most prominent strategy that came forward in public input. Everybody supports doing whatever would be necessary to increase utilization of the existing programs that are out there to feed kids, including WIC, SNAP, which is Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, federal programs that support meals at schools and in the summer meals as well, and school-based emergency food programs. So that there's a number of ways there's a number of ways one might go about doing that, but the primary emphasis being that we draw down existing funding that's out there to provide food for kids. The second is increase school-based food pantries. That was also, again, prominently figured in public input and is a strategy that is being used not just in this community but in many communities to be able to bring food to where people are naturally coming. And I would say one of the themes that came through in public input was that there is, particularly in East Portland, difficulty sometimes getting to food pantry sites, but most parents are able to get to a school. And so it creates a distribution network that works for many families of children. So that's a strategy. Third strategy, increase access to food during summer. This was a very, very clear theme that came through in public input. In general, trying to find ways for kids to be able to eat when school's not in session, but particularly in summer. So to increase the number of sites and also in some cases the number of weeks over the summer in which we can make meals available would both be a priority. And then last, we preserved alternative approaches, which would be other either innovative strategies or alternatives to the ones put forward to increase access to food and to increase the nutritional value of the food provided in existing programs. We included this strategy, which is a more open-ended strategy, which differs from all the other program areas, primarily because we haven't funded in this arena before, and we did 4 months worth of public input, which, as much as I would like to say that would be complete, I can't be confident of that. So I think we should remain more open in this category than we are in the other categories where we've been funding for 10 plus years and have more experience, or in most cases 10 plus years. The other thing that I think is important is that something that came through in public input that isn't it's difficult to see exactly where it fits precisely, is increasing the nutritional value of the food that is being offered. And that's something that many people care a lot about. And so I think that's opening a strategy that would provide innovative or interesting approaches to doing that, I think would satisfy something that was very clear that people wanted to do with no clear means for how it might be done. So, so I think that's something that we could welcome applications that would suggest some strategies to do that. So, so that's kind of the rationale for that, for those set of strategies. And is there someone who wants to talk?
John Steubenville?
Okay. John.
Well, first, yeah,
You have questions? Go
before
ahead.
John comes up,
Go
any
for it.
questions from the committee?
I have a question and a comment. The first is the question on increasing access and utilization of existing programs. Do we have data on the amount that we can leverage? So for each dollar that we put in, we can potentially draw down X number of federal dollars in food programs. Do we have a sense for the scale?
I mean, I think there's data that's specific to each program. So in terms of how, I mean, in terms of what the family qualifies for, right? So it's different for each program because there's a different set of benefits that come with each program. So the number of dollars you'd be leveraging would depend on which program you were leveraging through. Does that make sense? Yes. So we could come up with those figures. I think it would, I mean, my guess is we probably ask folks to give that information in the application. So if they were, presenting a broad strategy to increase utilization of 3 different programs, what do they expect to be the cost benefit there?
And then the second thing is related to the school-based food pantries for the increase in access to food during the summer. I think that there are opportunities with other existing facilities like libraries. For instance, this past summer, our Rockwood librarians noticed that kids were coming into the library and staying all day without eating a lunch or a snack. And so they started a school lunch program and were able to draw down federal dollars to feed kids every day during the summer. So I think just as we're looking at, school-based pantries is a good strategy because that's where the kids are. Kids are at the libraries during the summer, and maybe there are other places like the libraries where kids would gather.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that fits perfectly into the third strategy, to be honest. It's increasing access to food during the summer, and it doesn't specify where that has to take place. So if it's an additional site, I think it would be an additional site. So I think that would open up for applications for that.
Or it could be, if it was year-round, it could fit under alternative approaches.
Yes.
Yes, okay. Any other questions from the?
This is the most open.
Okay. Okay, we have John Steubenvall from the Food Bank wishes to testify. And even though I just said your name and association, if you could just repeat it into the microphone for the record, you have 2 minutes.
Good afternoon. John Steubenvall. I'm the Director of Advocacy for Oregon Food Bank. And I'd just like to echo a comment that was made just a little bit ago. And thank you all for the vision and the leadership and the staff of the Levy that you all have demonstrated on this. And we also want to acknowledge the faith that the voters have given to investing in this levy. And it's really a wonderful experience to be in this room today with a bunch of service providers, all of whom are gathered here to try and build a better Portland. And we're just happy to be part of that today. I've submitted written testimony, so I'll just make a couple of very quick comments. So Oregon Food Bank supports the proposed strategic direction for hunger relief as stated in the levy. Investing levy funds to leverage existing hunger relief efforts is an effective and efficient way to increase food access, especially for this new levy area of childhood hunger. This leveraging of investment also builds stronger partnerships between charitable organizations and the public sector, which certainly will lead to increased opportunities for collaboration as relationships grow among levy partners. Oregon Food Bank, at the same time, very much supports investing a portion of levy funds in childhood hunger funding that is alternative approaches. Many of these alternative approaches over time will grow and become proven models and key components of a city strategy to address hunger. And just as one quick example, just a few years ago, the strong partnership that today is the partnership between Oregon Food Bank and the Sun School program and others. Just a few years ago, that was just an idea. But that partnership has grown over the years and become a very strong strategy that this year will feed somewhere around 40,000 students. So we're encouraged by this alternative approach.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you, John. Okay, well, that completes testimony.
We have a little bit of time, so we were just going to open it up. If anyone didn't get a chance to testify on this or the earlier topic on allocation of funding between areas, if anyone speak now or hold your peace till the next meeting, or please send written comments to me as well, or to anyone at the levy, and we could pass that along.
Well, I want to thank, first of all, I want to thank the staff for all the hard work you've done for preparing for today's meeting. I know it's been a lot of work over the summertime, and so I really want to thank you. And it's very, your hard work is very evident through the presentations today. I think you've helped us immensely. So we've got a good picture of where we're at in the community and what the wants and needs are. And it'll be up to us over the coming months to make some decisions once we actually issue proposed requests for investments, which are coming up early next year. But before that, we still have 2 meetings this year. And I wanted to just make sure you all were aware of those 2 meetings. They're both scheduled right here in City Hall. We have a November meeting and a December meeting. And the November meeting will be Friday, November 22nd at 10 a.m., again here in the City Hall chambers. The December meeting will be Monday, December 16th at 1 p.m., again here in the City Hall chambers. You'll be receiving updates and reminders of that from staff on both of those meetings. And you can always go to the Portland Children's Levy website, which is portlandchildrenslevy.org, or on the Levy's Facebook page. So we hope to see you at our subsequent meetings. And I believe in our next 2 meetings, we will be adopting the strategies and the overall goals. And Lisa, why don't you, just give us a quick update what we're going to accomplish over the next 2 meetings.
So the hope would be that we would, in the next couple of meetings, and likely we'd have a meeting in early January before we finalize and publish. So there's looking at probably 3 more meetings before we make the final decision. So we need to set the allocation percentages. So you've heard some input today, and we'll summarize that for you. We'll be coming back to discuss that at the next meeting, and if appropriate, make a decision then. If you want to hear more input or there's more things to say, then we'll gauge that as we go. Same for the strategies. You'll get to hear whatever input is. This was less input than we anticipated, given the number of people in the room. But hear what the input is, and then have a discussion next time about where, and also Julie wasn't able to be here, we'll update her and give her, we'll meet with her separately to make sure she's up to speed, to have a discussion, and if appropriate, make decisions. If people want more time and to listen to more testimony, we'll do that. And then we have there's a whole set of stuff we haven't even gotten to yet on the RFIs themselves, so that earlier bit that I talked about, where we have to discuss the application and what it looks like, and also the funding process pieces of it that we need to put in place. So there's some other things that get left to decide. So those are the 3 main buckets of things we have to make up our minds about, or I should say you all have to make up your minds about, that we'll try to assist you over the next 3 meetings. So that's really when it has to get done. We want to publish before the Martin Luther King Day holiday. So to try and to give people as much time as possible to respond. So
great.
That's the plan.
Okay. Well, thank you, and thank you, committee members.
Thank you.
Welcome again, Chair Madrigal.
Thank you.
And we stand adjourned.